So if like 75 to 80% of buyers and sellers are only interviewing one agent, which is what the
Mhm.
stats show us when they go to buy or sell a home, I feel like, they probably should be interviewing more, but what's
Yeah.
maybe even more important than the number of agents they interview in total is the type of questions they're asking.
Yeah.
So there's like some different sites that have different questions and stuff. There's not really like a universal guide to this that any industry body puts out, at least to my knowledge. I don't know if you've
Right.
seen anything,
No, there's
Katie.
not, and I've searched. No.
Um, but
And any of the resources, they're just not good. The questions are just not good. They're not thorough. It's it's an agent like me and an agent that hasn't sold a house in 3 years. We have the same entry level, we have the same dues, we have the same subscriptions. We can do the exact same thing legally from every compliance standpoint. So the consumers need to be able to figure out how to tell the difference. And there's really no good resource.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's more important than ever because, we talked about this a little bit before, but just home ownership and buying and selling so much more expensive, so much more complex, a lot more nuances to it.
Yeah.
So how do you even know if you're working with someone who is like equipped to help navigate that process?
Right.
Because to your point, at an industry level, there's not a lot of differentiation or distinction or um, beyond like the licensing exam. There isn't really a lot of like structured training that you can assume every agent has gone through. So that interview process and like really understanding what skill sets, what experience level, what they're bringing to the equation, I think more important than ever. My guess is that a lot of people, if not already, are probably going to be using like ChatGPT or
Oh,
tools
they're
like
already
that
doing it.
to
I
get
feel
questions.
it. Yes, the questions are very ChatGPT,
You
and
can feel it.
they're very surface level. You can feel it. You can feel the M dash. Feel it.
So I'm gonna ask it. Like, let's say we're selling our
Yeah.
house. I'm selling my house. And I'm gonna going to interview an agent. What question should I ask?
Yeah.
And I would guess this would probably be a similar prompt to what many folks might do. Oh
Right.
wait, should I ask? Let's see what it gives us. Interviewing agents is exactly how you avoid leaving money on the table or losing your sanity. I'd agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. I like how the first question is how many homes have you sold in the last 12 months? So the question how many homes have you sold in the last how many homes have you sold is probably the most popular question. But I like how it's the last 12 months because you need to be in it. Like so you can't run off of 2021 momentum. You have to know what's currently going on. It's been a down market. Let's see how people are performing there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. I think a lot of people kind of rest on the laurels of a one really good year.
Totally,
And
of
they're
course. It's a
doing
highlight reel. So like if they're but you need to the consumer has the right to understand if they're hearing a highlight reel or if they're hearing team stats or if they're hearing brokerage stats or if they're hearing what actually is a true representation of that specific agent.
Yeah, that's where I think this is a good question to ask. I don't think this is comprehensive enough to ask about someone's experience. I
Hmm.
know we did a whole video on this, but
Yeah.
I think like because there's total experience of how many years have you been in the business, how many homes have you sold in that period of time. Kind of helps identify if someone's early in their career, if someone is kind of tenured, how much business they do because there is such disparity. There's a huge percentage of agents every year who don't sell any homes,
Yeah.
and the vast majority of agents sell less than 10 per year. A huge turnover rate as well. So I know we probably don't want to get into all of those details since we did a whole session just on the experience level and how to assess that. But this is, I think, like a great starting question for the experience because you want to make sure they're still in the game and they're
Yeah.
still getting that ongoing experience in the field because what the market was a year ago is not what the market is today. What demand was even a few months ago might be different in terms of dynamics today.
100%.
But I do think that to like really get a full picture of what type of um, kind of category of agent that person falls into, it's how many homes have you sold in the last 12 months? It's how many homes have you sold total? How many years have you been in the business? And I think something people should be really careful of here is, and if you're interviewing someone who says they're part of a team, confirming if they're talking about their own stats or if they're talking about the team stats, because that's something that happens a lot.
A lot.
I think even on some of like the sites and stuff, when you look up an agent, it'll show the team stats instead of the
Totally.
agent stats.
It's wild. I don't know how that I mean, yeah. It definitely is a blurred reality. So getting clarification is smart.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it could be that that person's newer and they're leveraging the structure and the training that comes with the team, but you still should as a seller, as a buyer, have that visibility
Yeah.
into what the individual experience level is like. Because in those scenarios, team could have great processes to make
Mhm.
sure everything goes through smoothly, but you still want to know what the person sitting across the table from you giving you advice, what
Yeah.
level of experience they have. That's not the end all be all, but definitely a good question. But
Yeah.
I would say this needs to be expanded. What was your average list to sale price ratio?
Yeah.
This is this is I think directionally a right question,
Right.
but I don't know if it really gets to the meat of it sufficiently because obviously you have scenarios where people buy the listing, right? Which
Right.
is not really policed a lot in the industry. There's not really like, we both come from the healthcare world. When something goes wrong and you do the healthcare equivalent of a price reduction or what have you, right? Like something
Yeah.
goes wrong, there's a complication, what have you. A lot of times there's peer reviews and all these different processes. You don't really see much of that in real estate. Like if someone buys the listing, so to speak, like that's, kind of oversells the seller on what they think it can sell for. And then
Yeah.
they want to get the listing and then they start cutting the price.
Right.
Um, there isn't like often, at least in most brokerages and setting, there isn't really like a lot of peer review on that.
No.
Or, hey, why
And
did this happen?
yeah.
So I think what this question is probably trying to get at is if they have like a history of doing that. But at the same time, you can have like the other side of that equation where
Yeah.
you can have someone who has a really high ratio because a lot of their sales were doing during a boom market where it was bidding wars.
Or they're
And
just really good at closing and talking to their clients down in their initial listing price so that they're always doing like a really event-based pricing. And maybe they sometimes leave a couple dollars on the table. Like you don't want to be like the broker that lists low. You know what I mean? So it's
yeah,
good, but that you get 102% list price ratio if that's the case. So there's a couple nuances
yeah. Well,
that
I
are
have a good example of that. My parents were selling their house a few years ago, and they had a former model home in a kind of smaller like community, and not a lot of properties. Not a lot of like similar properties for sale.
right.
And so I remember, the agent we work with distinctly telling me, "Oh, this needs a 7 in front of it to sell, like high
Yeah.
sevens." And I like kind of looked at it, looked obviously at the comps, but also looked at like what was available, kind of what were the different, just a lot of factors. And I was like, I'm pretty confident this can sell for 850.
Yeah.
And, kind of was like, I really think it's a 7. And I was like, you know what? If I'm wrong, then we'll reduce the price and I'll eat my mistake. House sells for 850.
Yeah.
So like that could have been, 50 to
Yeah.
$60,000 left on the table.
Right. And
Because
even if you
all
did get into a bidding war, it probably would have only ended up in like 830. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
even if we like, well, part of it too is there's sometimes you underprice because you can drive a bidding war,
correct.
but
But 60 grand, a
well,
lot.
but that's an intentional decision. I mean, a bidding
Right.
war, it just depends on the market, right? A bidding war, it could drive it up 60 grand, it could drive it up 100, it could drive it up 10.
Right.
I think that's like a byproduct of demand and assessing demand.
Yeah.
But like in that particular market, there were only so many buyers for that type of property. So like the likelihood of ending up in a bidding war was not very high just because your pool was kind of
Mm.
small. It's like kind
Right.
of a smaller desert town. And uh that's where like if you are underpricing to maybe drive competition, that should be a very intentional decision, not a byproduct of mismanaging the price.
Right.
And so like, but in that scenario, if we had just kind of, and that's where like, and obviously I had kind of, so I had done my own real estate deals, I had a little bit of knowledge in this area where I could look at it that way.
Hmm.
um like for my parents who don't really do much in real estate or who didn't do much in real estate, they probably would have just gone with whatever advice they had been given.
Yeah.
And so like in that scenario, the list to sale price ratio probably would have been 100% or over. That's
Exactly.
not inherently a good thing because
That's
we
what
were
I'm
leaving.
saying. Yeah. You have to
So
watch out for that too.
yeah, so like I think the ratio, it's worth asking. It's worth seeing if they track that. But I think what is far more revealing about how much trust you can put into the pricing opinion your agent gives you is less so the ratio itself, because there's a lot of ways that number can be presented. There's a lot of circumstances that can drive it that might not be indicative of what they're trying to get at, right, with this question.
Yeah.
I think it's far more important to ask your agent, like, what what is your process for pricing like a property, for giving me like a suggested price or price range?
Yeah.
And like what factors are going to go into it? Because almost always, what's the first thing you're going to hear, right? Comps, like historical comps or
Right. Totally.
comparables.
Exactly.
But that is only like one piece of the equation. It's an important piece of the equation, but I think there's a lot of agents who just use that.
100%.
And so for like someone who's not familiar with comps, right, that's basically pulling some properties, in a defined radius that are similar, right, size, price range,
Yeah.
within a relatively recent period of time, and that kind of gives you an idea of what the house is likely to sell for, and then you kind
Right.
of compare them. So, hey, this one has a pool, this one doesn't, right? Am I explaining it well enough?
No,
I'm probably
totally.
missing some nuance there. So, like historical comps, important part of that decision making process, but I really think there's like, I don't know, probably 9 to 10 components that
Totally.
should go into really accurately pricing a home. Like
Yeah.
off the top of my head, you have historical comps. But I think what is equally important, which was kind of one of the factors in that particular scenario for me on that house, was competitive landscape.
Yeah.
Because you could look at comps from the past couple of months, but like what is on the market
Right.
today?
And that's what the
And
buyers are comparing it to, not what the
yeah,
comps.
yeah,
Buyers aren't looking really
exactly.
at comps.
Like
Buyers
if
look
you
at
have a,
comps for price justification. They look at the active competition, which is the competitive landscape,
yep,
to see like what to choose from. So you need to price it to make you the obvious one. And pendings,
right.
because that's what buyers are saying yes to right now.
Well,
So
and
you need to,
taking advantage of what the competitive landscape is or using it to inform strategy, because like a comp could represent a price, but maybe that comp was sold at a time where there were a lot of options on the
yeah,
market and now
right.
you're one of the few.
Yeah,
That's leverage. Or vice versa. That comp sold for a premium because it was for sale during a low inventory, like a lower inventory period.
right.
And now there's more inventory that's come onto the market that's competitive that buyers might be looking at. So that might change kind of your strategy on pricing. But like, alongside comps, you have competitive landscape. You have interior, exterior condition, of
Hmm.
course, right? What is the actual condition of the home?
Right.
I think sometimes people lump together like visual representation and condition,
Okay.
because you have like, to me, in my mind, condition is that is like actually like what state is the property in, how much is this buyer potentially going to have to put in terms of like repairs
Yeah.
that are unavoidable, or livability concerns, or all of those different things. And then you have something like visual representation, which is maybe the house is in immaculate condition but it's a
Right.
very dated style, right?
Yeah.
Like the kitchen works great, appliances work great, but the style is like 20 years
Yeah.
ago. And so like that has a component to pricing, but they're also kind of separate things. I think sometimes people weight visual representation in the same way you weight condition, whereas one is more preference and one is
100%.
more like actual livability. And so how you factor those in for pricing makes a difference too.
100%. So Sheila, do you see they have red flags? A red flag here? I'm sorry. I love that they
Oh,
have red flags too,
yeah.
because
I
in
feel like
our videos we go over red flags on everything. So I love that they're at least framing it up to the point where like you need to notice these red flags too, because if somebody says the comps is how I list the property, or this is what you do, instead of talking about what you just talked about, then it is too vague and it's only part of the story and it's not even necessarily the most important part. So I mean, I
yeah.
think that that's great.
I think someone just saying, "Oh, well, let's look at the comps," and that's all they show you, and that's all they
Right.
talk about, or I look at the comps. Like to me,
Yeah.
that's a red flag.
It's
You want to
totally a red
hear,
flag.
yeah, you want to hear all the elements they're considering.
Yes.
So comps is one of them for sure, an
Yep.
important part of it. But like competitive landscape,
Hmm.
exterior, interior condition, visual representation, unique features of the property. Obviously,
Yep.
that factors in, and sometimes that can work to your advantage or your disadvantage. But they
Yeah.
should be able to speak to that. I think just nearby like
Like
developments,
location.
good or
Yeah.
bad, right?
Okay.
And like market dynamic, like there's the market dynamic as a whole. Right, what are interest rates? What is inventory? Market dynamics play a huge
Totally.
factor. That's
Yeah.
also why when you look at comps alone, it's not the full picture, because market dynamics can shift very
Exactly. And
quickly.
along with that go the buyer behaviors. So when buyer behaviors shift, I
Yep.
mean, it massively impacts the positioning, which pricing and
Yeah.
presentation is really just the positioning of the property.
Yes, you have market dynamics, you have local dynamics. So, like, is something being built nearby,
Okay.
good or bad? Is there a new company moving into town that is going
Yep.
to bring an influx of people? So, you have like local dynamics, you have market dynamics, and then you have seasonality depending on where you live.
Yeah.
Uh, how does winter play into it versus summer versus, is it a second home market? So there's like all of those components. You really want someone who's going to speak to all of those because all of those have a bearing on the right price
For sure.
and maximizing price. And I think if someone just says comps alone, which is a pretty common answer, then you're
Yeah.
really getting like a fraction of the full picture. So that's the red flag to me is if they're not saying all of those different things
Right.
when they're describing their process and they're not able to speak to that specific to your home when you're talking about the specific price of your home.
Yeah.
How long do your listings typically stay on the market? That's an interesting question. What do you think of this question, Katie?
So I think that the number one thing consumers should know is like my average days on market in 2025 was 22 and Jupiter was 30 or it was 87. So the fact that I know those two numbers, awesome. The fact that mine's 22 and Jupiter is 87 doesn't mean that I'm a home run real estate agent. I could have done one deal or whatever. I happen to have a mixed bag of some that were absolutely launched with momentum that was built up intentionally and we crushed it. It was awesome. And it was under a week in the market, 100%. But then I also had some that were in a timeline where the seller was like, we need to price this low because we need to have it move in 30 days or for whatever like lifestyle reason. So, or I have a client right now that they're like, you know what? We don't want to sell it too fast because it's a family member's property and they are not thrilled that they moved out of the property and to go to an aging home. So we listed it too high so that it didn't sell. So that one's been sitting for a little bit. We've adjusted it, but you know what I mean? So there's a lot of different like scenarios. So the days on market alone does not dictate the quality of the agent, but knowing your numbers in your market and your current numbers shows a good green flag that you have some decent exposure and experience to know that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great point. There's like nuance to it. And even going
Yeah,
back to our early example, like if you ended up underpricing, then your listing's probably going to move faster. That doesn't
correct.
inherently mean that's a good thing if that wasn't an intentional decision and if money was left on the table.
Right.
I think you're right. Like I think knowing the numbers and being able to speak to them is like one of the first kind of barriers that should be cleared. If someone can't speak to this at all, like I would be a little bit concerned about that. But I think again, like this question probably needs to go alongside a question about just what is your process to get like a property sold, because that's going to give you a better indication of, hey, is
Totally.
this person just going to take some photos and throw it on the internet and hope for the
Right.
best? Or is there actually like real strategy happening to position the house well, to activate, demand, to tap into like any latent demand that might be out there? So I think this is a question worth asking, but I think it needs some follow-up questions on process, which maybe ChatGPT is going to give us. If not, we could probably talk about them. Oh, there you go.
Right.
So it has like marketing plan.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I think it's a good question. I just think it needs follow-ups.
Yeah, for sure.
But what do you think about this? Have you sold homes like mine? Price
I mean,
point style?
I think it's a great question. So I can use this to my advantage if it is a home that I've sold like theirs. But I also, if it's not a home I've sold, let's say it's an elevated price point or a different kind of a golf community that I haven't sold in, anything. I think if you know about the community and you have a system and process to list a home, you can list a home anywhere. And you may not know the school districts and the local stats as well there. So you would need to kind of do a little bit of homework, but you could still represent that seller incredibly well. You don't have to have sold a home just like it, but
Mm.
there is some benefits. So like in my geographical farm, like it's certainly not a planned development kind of vibe, but the homes are similar, built in similar decade, kind of similar kind of custom home look. So being able to sell that home well, I do think my experiences allows me to sell it better. But I think it's a good question to ask because let's say you need to know what the agent kind of lives and breathes. So let's say somebody that was 45 minutes away from me wanted to sell a really nice house. And I was like, cool, I would love the opportunity. They should know that I'm 45 minutes away and that this isn't my custom market, like my go-to market. They should know that. So I don't know. I think that answers a lot of that question.
Yeah,
That
I
makes
think
sense.
it does make sense. I think what you're saying is that, this is whether they say yes or whether they say no isn't really what ultimately matters. What matters is what comes after the and or the but. So yes and no but.
Yes, correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think like the yes and what you want to look for is like, can they actually give you like a scenario?
Yeah.
Because and obviously numbers are great if they can say, yeah, I've sold, 30 homes in this neighborhood or in this price point, whatever. That's great to know. But I think what's really going to give you some context is if they can give you like a case study of it.
Yeah.
Kind of say, hey, yeah, we had, property very similar to this one a few miles away. We did X, Y, Z, and we were able to achieve,
Right.
these
Yeah, especially if
whatever.
it, like I can be like, yeah, I had a recent sale in this neighborhood. I know how the buyers are reacting to these properties. So I know what price category needs to go in. I know what kind of open house launching, what marketing materials kind of speak to them, what kind of
Yeah.
ads to run to attract them. So having understanding the property is more important than having them just sold the property. But you have to understand what buyers draw, what draws them to that neighborhood, to that house, and how to market it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and the
And then
nuances.
if it's a no, like what comes after the but, right? No, but I have sold properties in, XYZ area, and here's
Yeah.
where I think, your neighborhood differs, where you have an advantage, where you have a disadvantage. Or no, but I sell in this price point, but here's like what I'm seeing really working really well that I think would translate to yours.
Yeah.
So it's less about do they give you a yes or a no, and it's more about do they give you substantive examples or insight
Yeah.
after that and that goes with the yes or after the but that goes with the no that lends comfort because anyone can just kind of spout out some numbers on it and you could also have people who only sell in a certain area and therefore there are maybe strategies they could be using that they're not
Sure.
using yet
Sure.
because there's not exposure or vice versa you could have like a really nuanced property or community where you really do need someone who has that experience so there's no right or wrong answer to this it's just how much substance do they give you along with that answer that I think makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
Because it's going to matter to the homeowner. Like if it matters to you, like the familiarity with the house and the neighborhood, then great. Like let's say you have a club community, then
Yeah.
maybe that makes more sense. So it's not a there's not a right or wrong answer. It's really the what comes after the
Yeah.
answer.
So apparently there was a whole section for pricing strategy before we went on
But
our soapbox about pricing
that's okay.
strategy.
That's okay.
Like how
But
will
I
you
love how
determine
there's a what's your plan if we don't get strong interest in the first 2 to 3 weeks. That's one of the questions that nobody asks, so they should. So
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
awesome.
So how will you determine my list price and what data will you use? That's kind of the elements we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But I like both of these questions. So what price would you list at and why?
Yeah.
I think, for this question, I think it's really important that they're able to give you like a range.
Yeah.
Like kind of what is the high end, what is the low end, and kind of where's the likely midpoint there? Because if someone's just saying this is the number and they can't really speak to a range, then they're trying to plug a formula to what is dynamic because a range is like what will the market tolerate, right? There's a low end to that of hey, this is almost certainly going to generate demand and interest. Then there's kind of a high end to it of this, may make it harder to sell. We might end up needing to reduce, but it is possible that with
Right.
the right buyer we'll get there. And then there's usually somewhere in the middle, which tends to be where most homes sell at. And
Right.
so if you're using all of those elements we were talking about earlier between competitive landscape and market dynamics and all of these things, you really should land at like a range.
Yeah.
And then it's deciding together between Asian and client is like deciding together where in that range do you want to price at and what's the strategy because
Right. Because
you're
list
pricing
price is
something.
not the sales price. List price
Yeah,
is the list
exactly.
price.
Ultimately, like the market's going to dictate what the price of the home is going to
Yeah.
be that it can sell at. Like the best thing that an agent can do is read the tea leaves as well as they can on what
Yeah.
that's likely to be and then come up with a good strategy. So I think like just can they give you a range and can they speak to that? I think is important here. And then like what were they using to determine it? And then to your point, like what's your plan if we don't get strong interest? I think it's a great question too. I've actually not even seen this one in like the few materials that exist
I
out
know.
there on what to ask your
I know.
agent.
It's probably slightly biased based on our conversations. So because that's one question that I don't get asked a lot. And in my market, we have a list price problem. So our market's about 92% listed sales price ratio, which is bad. It should be like 95, 96, or so. So we are listing too high. Agents are allowing homeowners to list too high because they're just trying to get the listing. So I don't know if that's because it's the down market and we're having less transactions. So agents are more eager, and kind of just giving them whatever number, which is another red flag. Like if I were just to agree with your number, then that's just me trying to get the listing, unless you're extremely well educated and you happen to be right.
Yeah, but
Um,
even if the client is right, and you agree with them, you should be able to articulate why you agree with them.
Totally. A million percent. Absolutely. So, but there has to be a plan. So like if we miss the mark and there's not X amount of showings in this many days and buyers are responding negatively or whatever it may be, we need to have a plan to pivot, and what that plan is, how many days that is, and kind of what the expectation is. Because chasing the market is it's our job to avoid you chasing the market. Like that's just the point blank what it is.
Yeah.
Chasing the market almost always costs the homeowner more money than pricing it appropriately from the beginning.
Right, right. Because then you have, days on market accumulating. You have potentially, if you have a price reduction on there, then that, just from a consumer psychology perspective, that
Yeah.
tends to maybe open up oh, maybe there's more room to negotiate.
Yeah.
So that's where, aiming high, if that is the intent, if someone's going into that with eyes wide open of, I know I might not get this price, but it's worth trying anyway,
Sure.
that's one thing. And that's, ultimately it's the homeowner's decision. But if they're, to your point, like if someone's buying the listing where they're just agreeing with a high price that really is unlikely to be achieved and
Mhm.
not being upfront and transparent about that, then that could put that seller at a disadvantage, if they don't attract that unicorn buyer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is such a great question to ask. Obviously, the answer is going to vary based on the house, the market, all of these different
Sure.
things. But I think the question is like, does the agent have a plan? Like, if the first thing they say is like, oh, well, then we'd look at a price reduction.
Right.
To me, that's a red flag because that's like the knee jerk reaction,
Right.
right? I'd rather hear, any strategies they have to test the market.
Yeah.
Is there kind of like a phased plan
Yeah.
to get interest? Or like if they're giving you a price range, can they say, well, honestly, it's very likely we might not get interest in the first 2 to 3 weeks because we're going to go in at the top end of the range. And so
Hmm.
that's really just where we would check back in and evaluate that we want to continue to hold versus maybe go a different direction. But if like the whole answer is just oh, then we look at a price reduction or something like that, I think that's where it gives you a good idea that they might not be thinking through really how to get to the end outcome and maybe just focus more on capturing the listing.
Right. 100%. Yep. Buying listing. So
And that's a good segue because like marketing plan, I think this is interesting. So like, what's your full marketing plan? Do you use professional photography? I think this is, maybe, I don't know what the right word of this is, but like, I think there's a lot of focus on this theme of marketing in real
hmm
estate. And I think real estate marketing, like marketing a property, is a very different animal than like marketing in a conventional sense. Because in
yeah.
most forms of marketing, you are trying to sell a certain product, service, good to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Right? Like when Coca-Cola, markets, they're trying to sell as many bottles and cans of Coke as they can to as many people in the world as many times as possible. With
Right.
real estate, there's one property. You're going to have one buyer, right? Whether
Yeah.
that's a single person, whether that's a family, whether that's an investor, whatever it is, like you have one buyer, you have one property for one buyer. So it's like there's marketing as a component to it, but it's really about like matching. Like you're really trying to find and locate
Yeah.
the buyer that's going to bring the best terms and price and then connect them to the property. So it is like a different flavor of
Right.
marketing, I would say. And I
And it's
think,
like, yeah.
sorry, good.
Yeah. It's like stacked. So like MLS and photos alone, that's not targeting. So if what you're talking about finding that one buyer is targeting. There's active buyers, there's passive buyers. So we need to drum up all that attention. But and then if you go beyond just marketing the house on the MLS and photos, then you can have, more exposure, which is like a lot of agent facing stuff, a lot of social media, doing some things like that, which will add more. But
Yep.
then that's still not necessarily targeted. So you need to understand the buyer behaviors. You need to understand the market dynamics, and then you need to have intentional targeting to get to the correct eyeballs, not just the masses. So like if I were to take a fun reel and blast it out and just boost it, let's say, I could get 10,000 views on it, but it may not be the proper demographic. So I would rather have an intentional strategy where on a different platform, on Facebook, let's say, and I can kind of build out the buyer avatar and target those people if it could have a lot less views, but it was way more impactful. So
Yeah,
understanding
totally.
marketing as a whole is a lot more than just doing the good, like collecting the good assets of video and photo.
Yeah, yeah. I think these are like good questions in the sense that these are all elements of getting a home
Yeah,
sold. So I think it's worth asking these questions. But I
totally.
think it's like really about versus yes or no, it's about hearing that like what is the agent's process
Right.
to marketing, so to speak, the home. Like, and I think can they speak to positioning? So how are you going to position the home for those right buyers? Because obviously your buyer can come from anywhere, so you want to get as much attention on the property as you can, but you also kind of know based on market dynamics, trends, what have you, like what is most likely going to be the buyer persona, the buyer avatar that's going to bring the best price and terms. Like, is this a property that, an investor is going to be far more interested in because it needs a lot of work or what have you? It's like, is their marketing plan something that is like optimized for both positioning and exposure? Because I think sometimes people focus on like one more than the other. To your point, like, yes, you want exposure, you want views, you want as many people to see the house as possible, so that you can find that right buyer, but you also want to position the house well for who that
Yeah.
buyer might be. Obviously, there's some properties that are more likely to be purchased by an investor, or more likely to be purchased by a first-time home buyer, or more likely to be purchased by like an out-of-town buyer for a second home. So just, what are the things that are like most likely to attract the buyer that's going to bring the best price and terms,
Right.
positioning the property well in that respect. Like if you have a lot of out of state buyers coming in, I think having 3D tours and floor plans and stuff is so important, because if they're just coming in for a weekend to look at a property, they don't have tons and tons of time. Like they're going to be selective with which properties they see. So if
I
you
mean,
can,
I think 3D tours are important on every property, because even
yeah,
if you are local, like you are looking at the house for the first time on your phone, like that is the first
yeah,
impression, and you want to be able to like feel the flow of the property, and you have to keep them interested and not just have like real photos. And photos sometimes can be misleading, so people are, especially with like AI and a lot of things, are tricking the photos. So people need to actually like see the flow and walk through the property and actually feel it. So I think, but
yeah.
anyway,
I'm a
but
fan of
positioning the
I think
home,
in general, like whenever 3D tour is possible, I'm a big fan of it.
yeah.
But I think like whether it's a 3D tour, whether it's any component, like can they speak to what they're going to do to position, especially relative to like the most likely buyer groups that are going to bring those best price and terms?
Totally.
Because yeah, if your agent's putting a 3D tour on it regardless, I think that's a good leg up.
Yeah.
But if you're in a market where it's most likely going to be an out-of-state buyer, second home buyer, it's almost like a necessity,
100%.
right?
And
Have that
honestly,
to
I think
that.
every single thing that they talk about in this question, this section, is a necessity. Like,
Yeah.
so I almost feel like the green flag here is just that all these things automatically are spit out by the agent, because these are basic. I mean, photos, videos, drone, 3D tours,
Yeah.
presenting it online, putting some social media out, having some beautiful printed marketing materials, like marketing directly to the buyer who you know it is, and having open houses. Like that's just like 101 kind of stuff. It should be, at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like everything in this section is like good and worth talking about, and the
Yeah.
agent should in some way, shape, or form likely be doing. I would say that I think there's two layers to it though. I think there's like checking the box of are they doing these things?
Hmm.
But then I think there's like, is there thought and intentionality behind how they're doing these things? So that's maybe what I meant by the 3D tour example, is
Got it.
like, are they putting it on
Got it.
just
I
for the
gotcha.
sake of putting it on? Or they're
Right.
really like thinking about why that's necessary
Right.
relative to like your property, your buyer pool, the market. Because to your earlier point, like, someone could say, yes, I have 20,000 views on average on all of my videos. And great, like more eyeballs, the better. It doesn't hurt to get more attention
Right.
on a home in most cases. But is that like a vanity metric? Are they getting the
Yeah.
20,000 views because they're, primarily using that listing video to build their own real estate brand?
Right.
Or is there a lot of intentionality behind it where they're doing, kind of the targeted advertising and they're getting it in front of the right eyes? Because 500 of the right eyeballs matters a whole lot more than 20,000 of the wrong one.
100%. A
Um,
million percent.
so I think it's asking them these questions, or like to your point, is a green flag is, are they proactively able to walk you through this plan?
Yeah.
But it's also listening for the intentionality behind it, and maybe asking questions about that. I think like a really important question for anyone to ask their agent is, okay, so like what parts of this process are going to optimize for like active demand versus latent demand?
Yes.
Because most activities that agents do to sell a home really speak to active demand, right? So professional photography, video, drone, 3D tours, important to have. But that is like most likely going to be seen by people who are in the market, like they are looking for a home. So their
Right.
agent is sending them homes, or they're regularly on, Zillow or Redfin or wherever looking at properties. So you do want to optimize for that crowd. for your active demand. But if you're not simultaneously optimizing for latent demand, you're probably leaving a lot of opportunity on the table, because there's a whole world of buyers who maybe aren't checking Zillow and Redfin every day,
Right.
or who maybe aren't working with an agent at the moment, or they're on pause with an agent, so they're not regularly getting listings. So they're not even going to see the professional photography, the video, the drone, the
Right.
3D tours. This is where, like, targeted social media. This is where open houses that are really well done. Like, I know you have a whole process where you have all these different steps to kind of bring in people in the neighborhood and the
Yeah.
community and stuff, because a lot of them know other people who might be
Right.
buying or selling.
Network. Right.
Yep. Because, like, open houses, I think, a great example of whether it's being done to check a box or whether it's being done with intentionality. Because a
Or
lot,
for if it's for us, or if it's actually to get exposure. Because, like, listen, the open house doesn't necessarily sell a house. I mean, it helps, and it very well could, but it drives exposure and network effects of your listed home. Like, it 100% does.
yeah,
So, but a lot of times, like, if you can tell if you read over the process for an open house, if this is optimized for me to get buyer leads, or if it's optimized for people to know that your house is for sale.
yeah. So that's important. Like, buyer leads. What I don't know that a lot of sellers like necessarily know this, but a lot of people use open
Of
houses
course.
as a way to meet buyers and then kind of work them as
Mm.
leads, so to speak, and then make them into clients, which
Right.
is not a bad
Right.
thing. That's
Both,
kind of
it
like
all
working.
works, but you
Yeah,
can do it
it's not.
prioritizing the seller.
Yeah, like, if that is happening as an organic side effect to an open
Yeah.
house that's optimized for sale, great. But if
Yeah.
that's the primary purpose of an open house, that's where, it's box checking. That's not really in the interest of selling, actually moving the house and selling the listing.
Right.
And so I think this is where, like, even when they say, yep, I'll do open houses, ask them what their open house process is. Like, how are they
Hmm.
going to run one from start to finish? Who's going to host it? Is
Right.
it your agent or someone on their team who knows the house well? Or are they just kind of bringing in an unrelated agent? Like, it is pretty common, right, to bring in, kind of
Totally.
junior agents to
Go
run open
online for
houses.
$50, $75.
Yeah, which, I mean, look, everyone gets experience somewhere. Sometimes that works well, but, does that person know the house well enough to
Yeah.
really be able to present it well to buyers?
Right.
A good test is, does their open house process, and, like, what steps does it involve to generate buzz in the local neighborhood to bring the neighbors in? Because that's who comes to open houses a lot, is the neighbors. And if
Yeah.
the open house isn't optimized for those network effects, which is the neighbor calling their friend and saying, hey, this house just came up for sale, or, their family or whatever, that's really what you want. That's how you
Yeah.
activate latent demand. If it's just, hey, I'm going to put some balloons outside and take a sign-in sheet, and I'm not really going to do anything to drum up energy around this or bring in the
Right.
community around this, then it probably is a box checking activity or just a buyer lead focused activity, not something that's going to sell the house
Totally.
necessarily. So I think, look for, definitely check the boxes on what they're going to do, but then really ask questions. So if they say, I'm going to put your house on Instagram, YouTube, I have X number of followers, great. What type of, like, targeting do you do to get it in front of the right people?
Right.
How many properties have you kind of sold through that, or give me some examples of success stories? Do you market
Yeah.
directly to buyer agents? What is the process? So I like that it asks how. Will
Yeah.
you host open houses? Why or why not? But I think add to that, what is your open house process, and listen for who's going to be hosting it, what type, how they build up to the event, how they run the event. I think really getting to understand the intentionality in the process is just as important as what's going to be in the process.
100%.
So communication and availability. How often will I hear from you? By what method?
So this is a
I
huge
think
one.
this is,
This is
yeah, I
the
agree.
number
This is
one
really,
reason people think, I think the number one complaint about agents is that they don't communicate, or they're left in the dark, or they're like, did anybody like my house? Has anybody seen my house? Especially when it's a vacant property. If you don't know, like, who's going in and out of your house, it's kind of crazy to me. So, I mean, I think everyone should absolutely have an answer for this. So, like mine is, after any showing, I will immediately tell them the update and feedback. But then I have, on a weekly cadence, they're going to get a full report that has, like, the market activity, buyer feedback, all showings, all open houses, like, literally everything. Any ads I have running, any social media I have running, in, like, a well made report, and they get an email. So and it's dynamic too, so they could always click on it and see what's new. And yeah, so it's
yeah.
important.
And then I think too, what's really important is, how is that going to differ before we're under contract and after?
True.
Because there's the updates you give someone before you go under
Yeah.
contract, and then there's monitoring the process after. So like, are they using, obviously I'm a little biased coming
Right.
from the tech side of real
But
estate, but like, are they using tech that also just gives you visibility and access?
right.
Like, do I have to wait to hear from you when
Right.
something is going to happen, or is there some vehicle of transparency and access
Right.
that's going to let me see?
And that's a
Or
good point because I do have two different systems. So I have a system. I my second system they could go into the first one. So the first one is more like showing off the marketing and showing like the effort that's going in, and then the other one, which is obviously Mosaic, it shows the tactical workflow of what I'm doing because there is a ton of things that occur in a transaction once you are under contract. And even before that, if they want to see what's going on, they can still kind of log in and be it's fully transparent.
yeah,
But
but it
you know,
doesn't like it doesn't have to be a specific tool. I think you just have to
totally.
have something like
Exactly,
it.
because one for just guardrails, right? So like
Yeah,
before I started using the platform and I had checklists, those are great, and a lot of agents don't even have that. But like it's a built-in guardrail to make sure that there are no balls that are dropped throughout the transaction, so that one, the client gets the best outcome, but so
yeah.
that it's a good experience, so it's not stressful, so
Well,
they
and
know what's
that's
going on.
where, like, how often will I hear from you? By what method? And like, so basically look for, are they going to be able to tell you what tool or tactic they're using to give you on-demand visibility? Because
Correct.
if they're doing that, one, that's more convenient as a client. That's what we get in so many industries. But the other thing is, to your point, guardrails, transparent. If they're doing that, they probably have a defined process of how they're going
Yeah.
to get you from point A to point B. They probably have guardrails in place, so therefore they don't need to keep anything under like, you know, um, like smoke and mirror sort of
Right.
situation,
And the
right?
worst answer any agent can give you is saying, just call me anytime you want. I mean,
Yeah,
like, one, my clients can call me anytime that they want, but I am proactively answering or informing them of the things they would be calling me for in advance. And that is a lot better of an experience than you
yeah,
wondering, gosh, did those people like my house? Oh, my real estate is probably busy. I don't want to bother them. Okay, now I really want to know because I haven't heard. I'm going to bother them.
yeah,
It's just,
yeah. Call me whenever you want, or some equivalent of that, or even just like these are my hours. You can call me anytime in there. That's fine too if someone wants to set some boundaries around it. But that should be like the last thing in the answering this question.
exactly. That's what I'm
It
saying.
should
That's the only thing. That's a huge red flag.
Yeah. So you want to look for an answer that's like you're going to hear from me after every showing with feedback. You're going to hear
Yeah.
from me, once a week or every other day, whatever makes sense, but like some kind of structured cadence
Yeah.
on how things are progressing. And then you're also going to have visibility into everything that's happening if you want to log in and see, or if you want to access like our shared doc or whatever it might be.
Right.
If you get those three things, you're most likely going to have like a good communication experience.
Hmm.
And then and you can always reach out to me is usually that catch all. But if it's just very vague, like, oh, you'll get like, every few days we'll be keeping you updated, and
Right.
there's really no like substance to it, or it's just, oh, you can call me whenever you need to and we'll stay in touch.
Right.
Not a great sign, I think, in most cases.
And that's
um
also like a good time to like kind of ask, like, so the ones that are more like assembly line, kind of like the ones that do like hundreds of deals and you're passed off to an admin fully or like an offshore VA or someone like that, it's also good to know that because like you want to know if you can pick up the phone and call the person that's in front of you, you know?
yeah.
And that's not always the case. And I'm not saying that's a bad way to do business, but it's a very different way to do business. So I think that's another good question to
Yeah,
ask. And
I
I
think
guess,
this is so important. Like, will I be working with you directly or a team? Obviously, like within the real estate industry, we have over
okay.
recent years seen this explosion in this team
Yes.
business model, where there's like kind of, a couple team leaders or a team leader, so like a lead agent, and then they have, a number of people under them.
Right.
And there's different kinds of teams. There's teams where it's built around a couple core agents, and then it's largely like supporting staff. And that could be small, large, medium, what have you.
Right.
And then there's like other models of teams where it is very much like a kind of like an assembly line process, in the sense that
Right.
like you have an agent that talks to the client up until a certain point, and then you have, someone who kind of takes over primarily in the transaction, even if that agent is still kind of front and center.
Right.
I think this question is really important to ask. Will I be working with you directly or a team? And then if they say a team or me and staff, I think it's understanding like who would those people be? What experience level do they have? Where are they based? There's a lot of, I think, teams who use kind of offshore VAs and resources. Some of them are really great, like with anything, some are great, some are not. But I think, there's nothing inherently wrong with using offshore support. But is that like support? as in they're doing like kind of clerical stuff, or is like your actual transaction being managed by someone
Right.
offshore and not really by like the agent who's in front of you?
Right.
So at the end of the day, it's what is, the client comfortable with, but it's also understanding what it's going to look like so you can make an informed decision. So I think it's expanding this question. Will I be working with you directly or a team to whatever their answer is? If there's anyone else who's going to be involved in the process, it's
Yeah.
understanding who are they, what is their experience level, what exactly will they be doing, and like where are they based? I think those are good questions to ask so you can see if you're comfortable. And then if they say you're going to be working directly with me, I handle everything myself, that's not inherently a right answer either, because you need a follow up to that, which is, okay, if something comes up, if there's an emergency, if you're sick, whatever, who would then step into my deal, or like what
Right.
kind of coverage is there if you're unavailable to support on something, especially if it's time sensitive, and then like who do I have as like a secondary point of contact if like there's an emergency I can't get a hold of you, sort of thing. I think
And
those
this
are
is good because, yeah, this is one of the questions that I feel like I never get asked by actual clients. Like anytime like an agent from another state is referring me business, they always ask that because they want to know if I'm going to pass it off or if I'm going to actually handle their client's transaction, which I always do. But still, I never get asked this by anyone. Like it listing appointments, nobody asked me that. So I think that a lot of times homeowners are slightly blindsided when they're not. And I know because I've had multiple people tell me, oh, I work with this team or that team. And I thought I was going to get this person. I got this random person and blah, blah, blah. And it
yeah.
wasn't to their expectation. And they were definitely saying it in a negative way. So I think that's definitely a good question for homeowners to ask.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more. How quickly do you respond to calls and texts? This is an interesting question. I don't know, because I feel like this is a nuanced thing. Obviously, you don't want someone who's going to take days to get back to you, but at the
Obviously.
same time, like if it's instantaneously every minute, um, if someone has, if someone's doing, a decent amount of business, that is just not logistically possible to get back to someone every minute within seconds.
Oh,
And then
right.
if they make that a habit where they're like sending you a quick, I mean, it's fine to say like, hey, I got your text, I'll get back to you in a couple of hours.
Totally.
But if they are trying to meet a certain standard, if I get back to you in 10 minutes, that could also mean that you're not getting like a thoroughly investigated answer. So I'd exercise caution on this. I think like with this question, how often will I hear from you? What by what method? And hearing those answers, if they're giving you like clear answers, like we talked about, this question becomes less important.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to ask it, but I'd maybe frame it as like, can I expect same day responses from
Right.
you? Are there
Yes.
any days of the week that you're not available? Like
Right.
I've worked with an agent once who was very clear up front, like I don't work on Sundays. That's like my day with my family. Like I'm not going to be available on Sundays. And she's very upfront about it. And then I
Yeah.
had the option to decide if that worked for me or not. And then I've
Correct.
had other agents who are like, I will get back to you within 30 minutes. Like that is my
Right.
standard. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
it,
if I have an appointment that typically takes an hour, so I'm not going to be neglecting
Yeah,
the person in
yeah.
front
Well,
of
and,
me
and
for
that
my
that's
phone.
kind of the point. If someone's like, "I'll get back to you in 30 minutes," okay, is that
Yeah.
really feasible?
Yeah.
Are you having an assistant respond to me? Are you going through the
True.
answer?
That's a great, yeah,
And
that's something people don't think of. And like,
and then at the
but
same
in between
time,
appointments, I will scan through my text messages. And if it's a client or if it's a current transaction, I will stop and give them a few minutes in response to the question. Or if I'm like really in a pickle, I'll just be like, I'm going to handle this in an hour or whatever. So
yeah,
that's not really answering their question, but I'm still responding so they know that I'm alive and focused on
yeah.
them.
I think this is one of those questions where again, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's like assessing your comfort level in what they say.
Yeah.
Because if they say, "Hey, I'll get back to you in 10 minutes or 30 minutes, no matter what, every time," okay, understand that that might be coming with a trade-off of someone's helping them respond to it,
Right.
or or they're going to give you quick rushed answers.
Hmm.
Similarly, if someone's very clear about boundaries, like you decide if that's acceptable to you or not. Someone saying
Right.
I don't work on Sunday, as long as they're being upfront about it, great. If that's fine with you, awesome. But also, if you're in a market where there's a lot of showings and stuff on Sundays, then that begs the question, okay, well, then who will be handling a showing opportunity on a Sunday? Or like, would that just be deferred? And then you can decide if that
Yeah.
is acceptable to you. I think generally, like you want to expect like a same day response. If they, I mean, within reason, obviously, if you text them at 11:50, that might be next day, but like you generally want to like, kind of within 24 hours or same day, people are getting back to you unless there's some clear upfront boundary that's set. And then I think just like listening to their answer here is probably more important than the answer itself.
Right. Agreed.
Who handles showings, feedbacks, and follow-ups? I think this is such a good question because showings are handled so differently in different markets by different agents. There are markets and agents where it's like all lockbox, right? You throw a code on it.
Yeah,
A
yeah, true.
buyer's agent reaches out, you schedule the showing, you give them the code, they kind of self-tour, and then maybe you
Yeah,
follow up afterwards. And then there's other agents or markets where it's common practice to actually like attend the showing as the
yeah,
listing agent or representative listing agent, and kind of walk folks through. On a personal level, I prefer the latter. Like when I'm selling a property, I prefer the latter because I like knowing that someone who knows my property well is kind of there with the buyers, and like that first impression matters. So
cool.
depending on who the buyer is and what's important to them, someone who's coming in from an investor viewpoint is very different from someone who's coming in from a forever home viewpoint.
Right.
Like being able to like point to the things that like position the house well, sell the house well, I think is great. There might be circumstances where lock boxes make sense, but like I think it's really understanding the why of that. Is someone going to be present at the showing? If not, why? Like, is there a reason for it, or is that just convenient for you
Right.
as an
Just like you're saying right now, like that's the meat of it. Like as long as the buyer or the agent is like, yeah, like we always go to showings because we want to present your house, we want to be available to answer any questions. But then like if it's a second showing or if it's like a tour and the agent's like, oh, it's vacant, can I just pop in because I don't know what time I'm going to be there? Like having like a collaborative showing notes or something that I can share with the other agent that goes over the age of the roof, the AC, and all the other questions they're going to be asking like proactively. That
yeah.
just that just
That's
presents the
a great
home
point, like
well.
cooperative showing notes. If someone's not going to be at the showing as your representative as a seller, ask the question, okay, what if any materials are you going to be giving them
Right.
before like giving the other agent?
Right.
And then even if you are at the showing, what materials do you give out at the showing? That's a good
Yeah.
question to ask. Like that
Hmm.
tells you how prepared folks are coming. And then even if they say someone's going to be at the showing, an agent's going to be at the showing always, who's going to be at the showing?
Yeah.
Because there's like apps and stuff where you can just like hire a random agent
Totally.
for an hour
100%.
to go do a showing for you. And sure, is that like someone physically there? Yes, maybe for
Right.
like security of the property and stuff, maybe that's good. But that
Yeah.
person's like not an expert on the home. They're not
Correct.
necessarily going to be able to present it in the best light. They're really just there to check a box. So even if someone says to you as a seller, oh yeah, we're going to have people at the showings, you really need to ask the question, well, who? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be someone on the team? And see what they say.
Are they with the property?
Yeah, and then what materials are they going to give out? If they
Yeah.
say, "Oh, it'll be my showing assistant," okay, what type of preparation do you do for your showing
Yeah.
assistant to know the property well? How do they present it?
Right.
I think that's worth asking. Feedback and
100%.
follow-ups, understanding what they're. You're not always going to get feedback. Some buyers agents are going to share it. Some are going to, want to keep that confidential.
Right.
Does your agent have like a system for it? And then
Yeah.
how are they going to communicate that to you? Are they going to give you the raw feedback and all of that? So I think that's just kind of listening for, do they have a process? But I really
Yeah.
think people should like dig in to what showings are going to look like with their agent before they make a commitment to who they work with.
Right. So this next group of questions, negotiation skills, I'm not gonna lie, I think this is kind of silly because these are way too specific. I mean, how do I handle multiple offers? Like I can tell you how I present the multiple offers to you, and that'll benefit you. But like, what's the strategy when a buyer asks for price reductions or repairs? Like that is so specific to the deal or the property. It's
Yeah.
like so it's hard to ask those questions, and then like you can't just say like, "Are you a good negotiator?" Because the answer is going to be, "Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely." You
Everyone's
know,
going to say yes. But you're
right?
so right. Like, I would say it's a red flag if someone can give you an answer to the second question, because that
Yeah,
is so specific. Like if someone just
right,
says we don't ever do price reduction.
right,
Well, there's scenarios where it might make sense. Maybe you're getting really
right,
good terms, or we don't ever do repairs. Okay, you might make more
right.
versus reducing the price if you just do the repair.
Yeah,
Like someone
it's
who gives you a universal answer to anything
yeah.
that's like
There's no way.
negotiation strategy is probably not that great of a negotiator,
No,
because each one is case by case. I think what someone should look for when they're asking their listing agent, a potential listing agent, about negotiation skills is, what type of offer diligence do you do? And then see what they say. Because
yeah,
someone who does this should be able to respond, right? When you get an offer, obviously you have to present every offer to your seller.
right,
But there's a certain amount of diligence you can do on that offer. Like having a conversation with the buyer's agent, right? Okay, who are these buyers? Like, what is like just understanding what are their motivations, what's their situation, that can be helpful in a negotiation. Contacting maybe the lender and seeing how solid that pre-approval is. Or even just like these days with AI and stuff, people can like mock up pre-approvals and proof of funds and stuff. Like, are you even verifying those?
Right.
Um,
Totally.
like maybe doing like a little bit of research. If have you worked with that agent before? Is there anything in how they presented the offer, your experience of the buyer representation that might indicate there'd be risks to the deal, right? I've
Totally.
had a scenario where I was selling a property and the buyer's agent sent an offer to my agent and my agent just forwarded it to me, and like the offer that was attached was for my property, but the cover letter in the email was for a completely different property. Like I guess you just like copied and pasted it and then I forgot
Right.
to do it. So like
Sloppy.
yeah, the names, the price, everything like in the email was
Yeah.
completely like not mine and completely different from what was attached. So, we're all human, we make mistakes, but when you're doing something as high stakes as presenting an offer, that's kind of a red flag of
Yeah.
how the rest of the deal is going to go. And I'll
Huge.
be honest, like the rest of the deal, we ended up taking that offer because it was a good offer, but the rest of the deal was rough.
Yeah.
With
That's
that.
one of the things I do. I always review offers for clarity because it shows a little bit of the competence of the other side of the deal. And I want
Yeah.
to know if this agent, if they didn't include this addendum that's been in effect for 18 months, like that's not a good sign. You know what I
Now,
mean?
at the same time, like if someone is saying, "Hey, I'm kind of concerned about the buyer representation," definitely make sure that they're giving you the why and it's not just like a personal preference thing. Like because if there is really like a risk or what have you, or like I've worked on a deal with this person before. They're very, very unresponsive, or like they messed up this thing on the offer. That's not a great sign. Like they should be able to give you concrete examples if they are bringing up a risk in diligence. It shouldn't just be like, oh, I have a bad feeling about this, because you don't want like personal opinions or bias or anything coming into
Right.
this. But what kind of offer diligence do they do? I would ask that question as a seller and then see what they say. And if you get a deer in the headlights or you get a vague answer, not a great sign.
Right.
I
For
think
sure.
the other thing, more so than strategy on a specific situation, is do they talk to you about terms alongside price? Because everybody will talk to you about getting you the best price, but terms are just as, if not in some cases, more important. You could get someone a great list price or like great contract price, but then if there's a bunch of terms in the deal where you are helping with like an interest rate buy down, or you are covering certain closing costs, or maybe you wanted to stay in the property 30 days post close and they're not letting you, there's all these different components that go into like how strong the deal is. So when your agent is talking to you about negotiation, and all of that, are they talking about price and terms? I think that is like the main thing to look for. So
Totally.
like walk me through just, what are some of like the common terms you negotiate, or where have you seen pitfalls in terms? Like see how strong they are on terms, because everybody can talk price. Not every agent can talk terms
And
well.
there's so many more layers than just price. So 100%
Yeah.
completely agree.
Yeah. And then can you give an example of where you negotiate better outcome for seller? I like this question.
Yeah.
I just would naturally put it into the answers to the other two questions. So when they're
You're right.
answering for diligence or when they're answering terms, that's where I'd say, can you give me an example? And kind of ask that
Yeah.
along the way. So
But
there's
that's a good green flag too. If you're interviewing agents and they're answering questions that you have further down the paper, that's a great sign.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and that's where I think like example questions, I rather than just saying, can you give me an example as a standalone, I think just where you like thread that into these other answers. So when they give you an answer of, oh yeah, I often negotiate terms when it comes to like post-closing possession. I know
Yeah.
that's important to you. Great. Can you give me an example of that? I think that's like a good way to see if they're, walking the walk alongside talking the
Right.
talk.
100%.
Fees, contract, fine print. What is your commission? What does it include?
Yeah.
Obviously, super important question. Everyone should be asking about that. I
Totally.
think too, as a consumer, understanding kind of from their experience level, from what their process is going to be. It's like what they say their commission is, what it includes, but also like how that translates to what you feel your comfort level is. That's why I think it's so important people interview more than one agent.
100%.
It's kind of shocking that the stats are, especially these days, or that they only talk to one. That's really the only way to know for sure what your comfort level is on the value that you're going to get.
Yeah.
How long is the listing agreement? Can I cancel a contract under one condition? Under what conditions? Are there any extra fees I should know about? I feel like for sure this question needs to be asked. I
Yeah.
remember once I got hit like just a surprise. It was like a $500 transaction coordination fee.
Right. I
Um,
know.
And
Yeah.
I didn't know about it. It wasn't disclosed to me before.
No.
It was in the representation agreement, and it was like kind of frustrating because I was already paying this commission. I was like really blindsided by it. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a huge amount, but every dollar adds up. So I
Totally.
definitely ask about this because you do see that a lot where people will kind of split out transaction fees, what have you.
Yeah.
Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what are you comfortable
Right. I
paying?
went from a brokerage with no transaction fees, and now I have a 495 hundred or $495 transaction fee, and I always disclose it because it's it's not that big of a deal at the end of the day. But like also, if it is, the agent can eat that deal. So it's like you have to. That's part of the negotiation. So like if somebody's really stuck on that, but I'm getting them to pay the commission that I charge, then it kind of all works out. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just asking the questions and then
Right.
deciding like what you're comfortable with. But that's where I think like a lot of people ask one or two of the questions above and then jump into this stuff. And then you're
Correct.
negotiating for price alone and not for outcome to price ratio.
Correct. Yeah.
That's where like, that's where you kind of need to see based on their experience, based on their process,
Right.
based on how they answer all these other questions. How comfortable do you feel with their ability to deliver the outcome that you want? Because if you
Right.
want a really great outcome, that's probably going to come at a more premium price versus if
Right.
you're just looking for like a check the box service because maybe you're super versed in real estate or what
Sure.
have you, and you don't really need a lot of added strategic support. In which case, you should make sure that the what you're paying is representative of that as well. So
Right.
I think some of these are questions that consumers do answer
Yeah.
and talk about, but it's like you really should ask these after you have the other lens because that's going to tell
Yes.
you if you're paying what's worth it or if you need to negotiate.
Right. I like how it says if they get defensive here, that's information.
Yeah, that's
Agree.
true too. Yeah, if they can't carefully articulate it, I think
Yeah.
that's huge. Preparations and repairs. What should I do to prepare my home before listing? Do you recommend staging? Do you have trusted vendors? I think these are all really good questions.
Yeah.
I think people should absolutely ask this. Sometimes agents will proactively bring it up, right? Of like, I'd
Yeah.
recommend doing X, Y, Z. Sometimes you need to ask the question. I think what people need to look for in these answers, though, is the agent speaking to the like return versus risk.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so are they giving you kind of small things that can easily be done
Mhm.
that could have an outsized impact? Or maybe it's a large thing. That's not inherently a bad recommendation, but if it's a large thing, are they able to speak to the risk reward ratio? Because when you take on a large project, obviously there's disruption risk, like disruption to your lifestyle if you're living in the home potentially. There's cost risk, there's cost you're investing up front. And then there's timing risk because if we could go on the market tomorrow with the house as is, or we could spend 30 days, 60 days, 90 days doing certain repairs, renovations, what have you,
Yeah.
what can we anticipate might shift in the market? Obviously, no one has a crystal ball in the market, but factoring in seasonality and things like that, if you're in a season where there's not a lot of competition and you're going to take 60 days to do a repair and then that puts you into like a higher inventory season, typically that's something you should go in with eyes wide open.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combo of like what recommendations are they giving you, but when they give you the recommendation, can they speak to that risk reward ratio? Because that tells you they're putting thought into it and they're not just giving you something for the sake of it, or they're not just giving you like personal preference of, oh, I just like this color better.
Like it'll be easier to sell. So this is a huge pain point for a lot of my clients. So a lot of my clients are long-term homeowners that take wonderful care of their home, but they maybe updated it like 15 years ago and they're like, "Oh, we know the buyers here and this they want this and this and we have to renovate the kitchen and the bathrooms." I'm like, "Chill." I'm like, "You don't. If that is something, if they have a vacation home in North Carolina and they're like, "We're gone all summer, we're going to get somebody to do it. It's going to be great." Cool. But like you by no means need to do those things. The higher ROI and better quality of life is to tell them like the core things that have the highest ROI, like cleaning, decluttering, in Florida, like doing the windows, like things that really make the home clean, bright, and easily understandable for the buyer. That
Yeah.
is what the most return is going to be. So the buyer walks in, feels comfortable, and they understand your house. They just get it. Like the flow makes sense, the light makes sense, everything just makes sense. That is the best. And so that's what I think that like everyone should have to do, but that is not a destructive kind of thing. You don't
Yeah.
have to just go and renovate everything.
And sometimes something major maybe does make sense,
Sure.
but it's again, is that conversation happening with the sufficient context? Is it
You're right.
risk
You're right. You're
reward?
right.
Can they speak to why they think that
Totally.
is going to be useful? Like how much depth do you go
Yeah.
into?
You're right.
Because there's no right or wrong answer. It's so property specific, but it's
Right.
how much depth are you getting?
Right.
And so like if they are going to give you these recommendations, look for that. Do you have trusted vendors? I think this is a good one too, because like, look, at the end of the day, the agent isn't a general contractor. They're not going to be able to like necessarily own the outcome of how it goes, but are they with you through that process? Like, can they
Yes.
help you find vendors? Are they going to check in? If you're doing a more major upgrade, are they going to participate in the decision making to just give you information, or is it kind of let me know when you're done and then we'll talk listing sort of thing? Because I think how much like skin they're willing to put in the game in terms of their time and mental bandwidth, even though they can't really own the final outcome, kind of tells you how confident they are in those decisions.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a good question to ask, and also just asking, based on that recommendation, just like, kind of what parts of that process would you be involved in?
Yeah.
Within reason, obviously, like they're probably not going to be ripping out drywall themselves, but to what degree can they support? But this is interesting. So red flag question. I feel like there's red flags in how people answer things.
Yeah.
But these are, I guess, like questions to like scope them out. So
Like, I
what do
can't
you
answer the
tell-
first question. Like, what do sellers wish that they knew before listing? I mean, I can't think of it. A good, I mean, I have one seller right now that I told them our average days on market's 87 and they have an average home and they have offers very early. So they're like a little stressed on how fast it is. And that's a good thing. But like, I can't think of anything where sellers are like, oh, I wish we knew
yeah.
this before. You know what I
I
mean?
feel like the red flag here is that if they have like, I don't know, if they have a long list of questions or like a long list of things, or like, oh, people are so surprised about this and surprised about
True.
that, then they
Okay.
probably didn't do a great job setting expectations up
Yeah.
front. But at
Yeah.
the same time, like to your point, this example you just gave, I think is like a good example to that question of, like uh there's always some like there's always something that like we have this process, but every property is unique,
Yeah.
right? You're unique as a seller, your buyer's going to be unique, so there might just be things like that where we anticipate it's going to take 80 days and then it takes 30 and then you're surprised by how fast it goes.
Right.
Or we might be holding out for a certain price goal and so it might sit a
Mhm.
little bit longer. Like there's certain things you can't predict in a market, but like as an agent your job is to navigate that with them
Yeah.
as that's happening and set as much clarity up as front as possible. So I think if they have like a really long list here, that's probably a red flag. But at the
Yeah.
same time, if they can't speak to the fact that there's always nuance in each deal,
Right.
but like their job
That's
is
a
to
good
help
point.
navigate through that, then
Right.
and they're just like, oh no, I tell my clients everything. I feel like that also is kind of a red flag. So I think it's just can they speak to nuance is what I'd consider a
Right.
great
Like the
flag.
next question, like what could go wrong in the sale? Like, how long do you have to have this conversation?
Yeah,
Because there's
everything.
a million
Everything
things
could
that
go
could
wrong in
go
the sale.
could go wrong in a sale.
Yeah.
It's just how you handle it. So like I think the right answer to this question should be anything that aligns with I am a problem solver, I got your back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But in a
Um
way that's like, but here's the thing, like there's so many scripts in the industry, right? And
Sure.
so there's like people can say that. How do you know it's not lip service? This is where I think like this is where I think two things are important. Transparency of like if someone says, don't worry, my deals are always smooth, that's a red flag to me because there's like
Exactly.
so much to your point, there's so much that could go wrong. That's
Totally.
why you're hiring a professional. So I
Yeah.
think their ability to own that of look, there's a lot of things that can happen in a deal. But like, here's a couple examples, but like my job is to help navigate that. So like, can they give you an example or two of something
Yeah.
they've solved? I also think what's really important to look for is like what's just as important as getting to the closing table is protecting your client if it doesn't make sense to get to the closing table. So
Totally.
like maybe you accept an offer as a seller and it seems great and obviously everyone wants to close, but then during inspections maybe they make a lot of repair requests that don't make sense, or their financing is looking a little flimsy or something like that, and it makes sense to extricate your seller from the deal.
Yeah.
That's also something that's just as important as getting to the closing table. It's getting them to the right closing table.
Yeah.
So I think it's like understanding, can the agent speak to that? Like, right, if something goes wrong and like give me an example of how you're able to help a seller like get out from under a contract that didn't end up being the right one.
Right.
Or like when a deal went awry or something like that. Um,
100%.
I think that's worth asking
Yeah.
too. Like how do you
Just
help
talking
people?
to them. So like they should have an answer. You know what I mean? Like 100%.
Yeah. Why should I not hire you? This is an
I
interesting
love this
question.
question. I love this
What
question.
would you say to
You
this, Katie? If
you
I
should
asked
not
you this
hire
question?
me. One, if you are not comfortable right now and you don't trust me and you feel pressured, don't hire me because then it's not vibing. Or if you think I'm annoying, we are gonna be talking a lot. I am gonna be advising you through a really big financial transaction. You should feel comfortable. You should feel like understanding that you should trust in my competency and what I say to put you at ease because this is a big financial transaction. So if
Yeah.
you can't stand your real estate agent, like don't hire that person. That's
Yeah.
silly. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I caveat that a little bit though, because I
Okay.
do think a lot of agents have built their business around being likable. And
Totally. But that's not
it's
enough.
that's not enough. This is
No.
a big, big financial decision.
Right.
Buying and selling a home doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Correct.
If you buy a property that's not a right fit for you, that has lifestyle impact, that has financial
Right.
impact. If you sell it, if you leave 50, $60,000 on the table, like almost happened in my
Totally.
scenario, that's a
Totally.
lot of money, right? So
Right.
there's like, no single real estate decision happens in a vacuum. And when home ownership was, I think, less expensive, maybe a little less complex,
Yeah.
a lot of folks got away with building a business on personality. Now we live in a world
I
where
feel like they do still, but
they
it's
still
not
do
enough.
try to do it because that's what the industry has
Totally.
done for a really long time in many parts of the industry. But we're
Yeah.
now living in a time and a day and an age where home ownership is way more complicated than it's ever been, right? We have
Yeah.
rising insurance rates, rising taxes, an affordability crisis, median age of average home buyer going up, lock-in effect on interest rates. Like there's so many
So
factors
much.
that while it's great to like your agent, at the same time, like, are they bringing the right process? Are they bringing the right
Right.
skill level? So I think that's like a good answer of if you don't feel comfortable yet in terms of
Yeah.
my advice, we should keep talking so you can decide if you do feel comfortable or not or
Yes.
what have you. But at the same time, like I do think a consumer on the other end of the table really needs to optimize for outcome over likability.
100%.
Hopefully you
I
get
mean, like
both.
when I say likability, like I don't mean like they want to go get a beer from me or like invite me to their book club. I mean like they like what they know that I am damn good at my job and they need to
Yeah,
trust
like do they
that I
trust
have
you
their back.
basically?
Correct,
Yeah,
right.
I think what
And
you're
like
saying is like, don't hire me if you don't trust me yet. If you don't trust me,
correct.
let's figure that out together. Or you should find
Right.
someone that you do trust because you do need to trust your agent. Like you need to be
Yeah.
able to count on them.
And in the same
I
breath, I don't think that people that are my kids' friends' parents, they shouldn't just hire me because they like me from hanging out at soccer practice or whatever. Like
Yeah,
that is a huge lead pillar for a majority of agents, and I don't think it's the
yeah.
right one.
I would throw in here, I think like what would be a green flag to me is if I asked an agent this question and then they asked me back, well, how many agents have you talked to so far? Because like we said, like statistically, most people don't interview more than one agent.
Yeah.
And how confident your agent is in you talking to other agents, you getting second opinions, you interviewing people before you make a decision tells you a lot. And then like, do they encourage you to do that? Because there's two schools of thought, right? In real estate, there's the agents and kind of the organizations in the industry that see this as a sales business. And then there's the agents and the organizations in the industry that see it as a professional services, more advisory business. And so if you're kind of working with someone on the ladder, they're kind of optimized to try to close you as quickly as possible, close you on the spot. So a lot of folks who look at it through that mindset really aren't going to be encouraging you to interview other folks or that sort of thing. Someone who's professional services or advisory, like really most likely wouldn't be threatened by that
Yeah.
because it's like when you hire a doctor, when you hire a lawyer, they want you to stick with them once you trust them and once you're confident in the decision. Like most of the time, like if you go see a doctor, they're not going to be offended if you're like, I want to get a second opinion
Right.
or I'm, kind of seeing what's a fit. And so similarly, like I think I would be impressed. I don't feel like you don't see this often, but I would be impressed if the agent on the other side of the table, if I was buying or selling, if I asked that question, why should I not hire you? And they ask me back, well, how many people have you interviewed? And if I say I've only interviewed you so far, then I would say, then you shouldn't hire me yet. You should talk to a couple other agents and then decide who's going to be the best fit for you.
Right. Yeah. Fair.
Um, and I think that's something like a consumer should
A
do.
consumer should definitely do that, but it just yeah, they should definitely interview multiple agents because and like I could go to a listing appointment and I could do everything that I say, I do a great job for my clients. And then somebody else that is a hard objection handler and pressure, like maybe that's what people like. You never know what people like. So like
Yeah.
people have to find their groove and what's going to work best for them as long as they're clear on it. You have to understand what you're looking for so that you're not essentially not tricked, but like persuaded into an opinion or closed. You're not closed.
Yeah.
You gotta know where you're to ask so you're not just closed.
Yeah, there's a really, really wide spectrum of experience level, personality, skill set, approach to the business,
Mm-hmm.
both tactically, strategically, philosophically, right? Real estate's a really, really diverse industry, and it doesn't have quite as much of the structured training paths that other industries have. So you have like this really wide array of people in the business. And so, like to your point, there might be a better fit for that specific house. There might be a better experience fit. There might be a better, kind of dynamic fit.
Yep.
But like at least talking to a couple of agents is what's going to help people determine that.
Totally. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I would say like I thought the ChatGPT questions overall were pretty good. Like I think if someone
I'm actually shocked at how good they
yeah,
were.
they were pretty good. I think there were probably a few that maybe needed follow-up questions, and then I
Of
think
course.
a lot of it is in like learning how to interpret the answers. But I think if someone's using ChatGPT for like what should I ask my agent, they're probably like already ahead of the game.
Yeah.
But I think if they kind of scan and look for the answers, they're much more likely to end up with someone who's going to be a good fit for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, that's a wrap.
Yeah. I